advocate of Fort Hare embracing an urban future in the metro. I wrote in the newspaper about that. I made some enemies by doing that with municipal managers, etc. I was told that does Fort Hare think it's running the city now, you know, those sorts of things. But I also tried to persuade people on the Fort Hare Council. And I've been, let's say, singularly unsuccessful, really, in that bid. The focus of the centenary was really on the heritage value, and I can understand that, of the institution and its connection with African nationalism. And then subsequently, under the current Vice-Chancellor, I mean, there has the most important development at the university has been the student village that has now materialized and obviously gives a lot of capacity to the Alice campus. And given the backlog of historical backlog of things, I mean, certainly the residents were needed. But I also wonder whether the volume of resources, R1 billion odd invested in catalytic zones in the inner city of Buffalo City, Fort Hare, but also other institutions that cohabit that space, including the hospitals and the private colleges and WUSU and others. A spread of that kind of resourcing might not have catalyzed a growing, you know, set of opportunities. But one can understand that an institution is linked to nationalism. No institution, you know, is linked to national African nationalism in the way that Fort Hare is. So while I understand that, I kind of still want to make it clear that there is an opportunity here that this book speaks to, and that I have been speaking to that opportunity in the past. And I argue, in fact, I wrote a book in 2019, which is a history of the city, called City of Broken Dreams. And I said in that book, one of the central arguments is that nationalism will break your dreams, okay? White settler nationalism broke a lot of people's dreams because of its exclusion. It's looking after itself, okay? And African nationalism can equally break people's dreams. So we've got to try and be open, cosmopolitan, and inclusive in the way that we think about the future. And, you know, I think ethnic nationalisms of different sorts have been very prominent in this region. So that's the first point I want to make about the history of this. And I think it's quite important. So these are not like ideas, flippant ideas. They're ideas that have been preoccupied with, as have some of my colleagues. Francis, who isn't here today, wrote his PhD on this topic, and sadly he's not able to join us. And it's available at the Fort Hare Library, and it's well worth reading. And Aneza did most of the research with Indira on this project during the COVID period when I wasn't. Okay, do I just push to go? Yeah. To go on. Okay, so the structure of the book is it's quite dense. There's quite a lot in it. In fact, each one of the chapters is a standalone, so you can read it for. So the first, to go through very quickly, the first chapter is just to remind the reader that colonialism has a legacy, that people do not always feel as welcome in all parts of our history, of our cities, because of their histories. And the city centre was for a very long time an area where people weren't particularly welcome, unless they were shoppers, of course, at thing. But it was a part of the city that was built for a particular ethnic identity, the settler image of the city. So when we think about transforming that space, one's got to bear that in mind. And if you think about why people feel unwelcome in certain spaces, you also have to bear that in mind. It's really very important. So that is what the legacy of the colonial city cannot be ignored in a case like Buffalo City, given its history. Second issue is placing the smart city. And there the argument is really picking up on this global discourse around smartness. Everyone wants to be involved in a smart city. Then what is the smart city? Could Buffalo City ever be a smart city? Is it such a city in the making? What would be the components of that city? I will skip chapter 3 because I'll skip chapter 3. Then the chapter 4 focuses on after mall economics. So it argues that from being an industrial kind of city that was aspiring to industrialize, a lot of industry has left, except of course for the automotive sector, which is still an anchor here. But everyone thought the economy would grow from the shopping malls. Consumerism would drive economic growth. And that is proved to be a problem because people have become more and more indebted. And so they have less to consume because they owe so much to the bank and to the thing. And it's not really driving a productive economy. It's driving a consumption-oriented economy. So how do we address that? Do we go back to industrial production? And is the city competitive in that area? We have a strong focus with the IDZ, etc., that achieves some success in that area. But on balance, the city has lost tens of thousands of jobs, and the region more broadly, with Butterworth and Dumbaza and those areas collapsing, the track record is not so good. So the question then is, were you to invest that kind of money in driving higher education and new economy or more technology-oriented economy, would you achieve some of those results? Would you achieve results? And we noticed immediately that the pandemic hit, that the discussion quickly shifted to where's the cable going to land? Is the cable coming to the IDZ? Have we got enough digital skills? So there was a real shift in the economic debate towards, oh, we're far behind on the digital economy. We're going to be left even further behind. And then the question was the digital divide in the city. In addition to which, there was the question of, will our students even be able to do online learning in the city because of the thing? And so let me go through this very quickly because I think that gives you a context anyway. You can respond to that. And so I'm just in these initial slides looking at the image of the smart city, black smart cities. Afrofuturism is all about technology. It's linked to Black America. The image of Black Panther, the movie, was really a global success, the biggest selling movie in Africa, actually, in terms of participation, and it represents this appetite for technology and smartness, okay? This is some out of West Africa, these artistic renderings of Lagos, are really fascinating, and they express this kind of appetite for smart city development on the continent. And I could talk a lot about that, but also this kind of imagination on the fringes of Lagos of kind of high-rise shacks, shack settlements, and this kind of transformation of the built environment. The interesting thing that we comment on in the book is that there's very little of this kind of imagination in South Africa. We seem to be wrapped up in this kind of racial politics. Our image of success is white suburbia or whatever. You know, we are more interested in the gated community than we are in this transformation of our identity and our cities. And I think we have a lack of creativity in this area, and we're rather stuck in. Among politicians, I mean, we know that our president has mentioned bullet trains passing Buffalo City and things like that to sort of raise the appetite for this. But we're definitely not the first on the block in Africa in relation to imagining smart city. It really is a big discourse, particularly in West Africa, but also in Cairo and Egypt. There are 30 new smart cities being imagined, and East Africa, Kigali, Kenya. The key thing is that universities are absent from these imaginations of the smart technology. Not one of these programs really is anchored around the university, a key university in Africa. And that is where there are just a few images here of how South Africa's course, that's actually a real smart city being built in the desert outside of Cairo. But these are some of our imaginations, including of Port St. John's over here at the bottom, which somehow will become a smart city before Buffalo City. Just yesterday, if you look at the 29th of thing, two very senior academics at WITS were claiming that South Africa doesn't need new cities. It needs to focus on fixing what it has. But yet our cities are so unequal and so unpleasant in some ways for some people that I can really appreciate this desire for newness. You know, this appetite for newness. I can see that young people that are interested in technology can't really see a route to that where they are. And so when the president speaks to these youthful aspirations, everyone goes, yes, yes. But the images are so far removed from the reality that we wonder whether we'll ever get to that destination. And that's also the challenge in Africa. I think many African cities don't feel very appealing to those that live there because of poverty and legacies of colonialism and other sorts of things. That the idea of imagining smartness as being outside of the city is common. And I think these authors are right, problematic. Okay, it is problematic. But unlike them, I can see why it is there. Okay. Now I want to just, but I'm going to end in a few minutes, okay? But I want to alert you to what I believe is like the global dominant discourse of city building in the North. Let's exclude Africa and its fantasies for a moment. It is the university city. It's the imagination in the global North, whether you're talking about Southeast Asia or America, is that these innovation districts, what they call smart city, is a precinct, not a whole city, a precinct. Those precincts are anchored by higher education institutions in almost every instance, whether it is in Boston, whether it is in Philadelphia, whether it is in Dubai, whether it is in Shanghai. This is the global model. And we have not paid much attention to that. I don't know whether, for whatever reason, there might be some good reasons for that. And this book that I referred to that was published here in the thing, Anchoring Innovation Districts, this guy, Costas Spiro, is a former provost of one of these top universities, and he is saying how brilliant this model of integrated entrepreneurial university. But are universities for entrepreneurship? Are they supposed to be for profit-seeking ventures? Or are they not supposed to be there for intellectual things? So should we be celebrating the extent to which they have compromised themselves to big capital in the way that African presidents are prepared to give huge tracts of land to Chinese investors, etc.? Is this actually any different is really the question we need to ask. And this is just some examples of Melbourne, Australia. I think that is Boston, and how these precincts are being transformed, especially inner city precincts. Here you are, they're all over the show. Leeds, Glasgow, they all have innovation districts, and these places are targets for big capital. Privatizing public good. This is really, if I go quickly down to this book, In the Shadow of the Ivory Tower by Baldwin, absolutely brilliant book by a Black American who grew up in the south side of Chicago, and he's saying what this stuff does is that it just drives inequality, okay? It's bringing capital into his south side of Chicago as pushing Black families out. And in fact, these campus police are the very ones that are hitting people on the streets together with the city police in Black Lives Matters protests. So the New Urban Crisis, another book that says that this kind of innovation economics is driving inequality. Does that mean that we should? It means we need to pay very careful attention to what the partnerships with tech companies and businesses can bring cities, okay? But at the same time, we've got to realize that without that kind of investment, we you know, as they say, it's terrible to be exploited by capital, but on the other hand, having no capital is an even worse situation. Rather have a low-paid job than no job at all. So the question really is that model, which is I think he's right, has become the northern global dominant model of urban development, is deeply problematic and needs to be criticized. And I'm not going to go through because that's where I just explain. So are we not stuck really at this right at the beginning here? This is Detroit in the 1960s, where factories are knocked out. It says they're motor city. You can see the thing. Are we not a motor city that looks a bit more like that than those global things? Does capital, all the kind of capital that drive Boston, really come here? These are questions we need to ask. And then the question becomes, are our cities, the condition of our cities, making it impossible for higher education to reproduce itself, reproduce the kind of talent that we require? So is the inner city, Buffalo inner city, really a conducive environment for higher education in a productive and a competitive framework? That's a really profound question. And the fact that you get a second-rate qualification in the city has something to do with the place. Are we not at Makanda now facing an absolute crisis with one of the top 10 institutions on the continent being mired, what I call mired in place, where the place is making it almost impossible for the institution? And should the office of the Premier not be paying very careful attention to these precious places that reproduce our talent and potentially give us a gateway to a new economy? And to start talking about Port St. John's and other opportunities is all very well. But if in the shadow of that discussion, the places that we have are so mired that within a decade, South Africa has 10 rather than 22 higher education institutions. And I'll end over there.
All right. Thank you so much, Prof.
As usual, I was a bit longer than I should have been. But anyway.
Thank you very much for that, Professor Bank. I will now hand over to the second author of the book, Uanezwa Madini.
You should tell people where they can get a copy if they're interested.
Yeah, we'll just close off on that at the end then.
Okay.
No, this is not the one. So I'll talk. Yeah, I'll turn it around now. All right, over to Aneza. Where do I move? Do I use the arrow? Thank you, Prof, for the presentation and for giving me the opportunity. Prof Leslie has touched on some parts of my presentation about embracing the new digital economy, and my presentation will be on specifically on the digital divide. And my presentation will reflect on what actually is happening in the Buffalo City based on the survey that we did last year, which is a motivation behind one of the chapters that I contributed with in the book. This one.
Apologies, colleagues, for that slight delay. We're just experiencing a bit of technical glitch on our side.
Yeah.
Okay, there you go.
Okay. So this presentation will reflect specifically on universities. The survey was not only, we were not only interviewing people, only students, but this presentation will be on the survey done on the higher education institutions based in the Buffalo City. So this is a true reflection of what is happening in the Buffalo City in the higher education institutions, and I will also try to illustrate what were the views of the students that were interviewed during the survey. So we interviewed a lot of higher education institutions, including private colleges, public colleges, and the universities in the Buffalo City. The presence of these higher education institutions in the Buffalo City presents a unique development opportunity for the city. But in East London, what we have found out is that this development is at its infancy. There is little collaboration that has been observed so far, only then, except for the university library that accommodates the universities, but now leaves a question of what is happening in colleges, what is happening in private colleges. This collaboration, however, indicates a positive outcome that the cooperation among these higher education institutions can produce a development of a curricula even on new technologies. So during the pandemic, these colleges and universities were caught unaware. The new normal presented ways of new learning virtually, and the requirements were included using the new technologies, of which many institutions lacked the capacity to accommodate those new technologies, and a lack of know-how for lecturers even who were supposed to use those technologies and present to the students that were now forced to be learning virtually from home. And other results emerged from these universities that we interviewed was that views from private colleges and public colleges were different, even though they are all colleges, but they were far different from each other, and they were also different from the students from universities, and that introduced the digital divide that I'm now presenting under. The college students' view was that they are far different from universities, while private colleges felt that when they compared themselves with public colleges, they are different, and there is lack of support when it comes to them. They have to do everything on their own. So this brings up an introduction of the fact that I mean, what other people have written about, that the online learning has always been for the middle and upper classes in many areas of South Africa, and this survey brought up that it revealed the majority of students in the inner city concerned about a number of issues, including the lack of access to devices, electricity, stationery, to make the new way of learning a possibility. It also revealed that students with common problems are those that were affected by the same problems were from the same residential area. For instance, we found out that students that are not staying in residences are more disadvantaged than those that are staying in university residence. At the same time, we also found that students that are from private colleges are more disadvantaged than those that are at public colleges, while those that are in public colleges felt a huge difference when they compared themselves with universities. So they felt that the universities are more supported than them, meaning that there's lack of support, and also there is little collaboration between these higher education institutions. So right there is just an illustration and an analysis I've done based on the supply of data in these institutions during COVID-19, while others were learning from home. So we found out that many students from private colleges were not receiving data, and however, are spending more time on data, while those that are in public institutions receive data and they spend more time. And the reason that was raised by these students was that their universities are offering them with free data, while those on public colleges on private colleges had to buy their own. Those that were in private colleges felt the need, and also they wanted, it's not that they did not want to spend more time, they wanted more, but just that they did not have the capacity. They were not supported when it comes to data supply. I've already touched on this. And again, this graph represents that public institutions, the majority of students from public institutions receive data, while a few from private colleges receive data. We further made an analysis based on the internet access by residential status. Those that did not receive data, we wanted to see where are they staying. So a lot of students that are at university are staying in university residences have got more access to internet than those that are staying at home. And with regards to access to study material, a lot of students complained that they did not have access to study material. And a lot of those students were from private colleges and also from public colleges. And again, we also found out that the students that did not have access to study material, specifically during COVID-19, with those that were studying from home. Those that were already on residencies had more access than those that are at studying from home, and those from private colleges and public colleges generally, because both public and private were included. So those that have more advantage on accessing study material with those that are at university residences. I've already touched on that. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Aneza. Colleagues, that is now the official launch of placing the Smart City Policy Monograph. We would like to congratulate all of the authors of the book. Some of them were unfortunately unable to join us, but we are very proud of all of this work, and we would like to officially launch it now and say that it is publicly available on the ECSECC website under knowledge management. I think it's under the books column there. So the link is available for download, for public download. And then to move on now, colleagues, we have also invited two of our colleagues from the Eastern Cape business sector to invite them to respond to some of the ideas that are coming out into the book. And I think the main question there that we're asking, that now that we're really starting to interrogate the role of universities and advocating for collaboration for urban and inclusive development, what then is the response from our enterprises? What then is the response from some of the SMME sectors in how do we now drive a more collaborative agenda for urban development in the Eastern Cape? So I'd then like to hand over to Mr. Papama, who is from the Business Management Youth Forum. You will use mine, sir.
Need to come there.
Yes, please.
Keep it slide.
Okay, so after this presentation, we will then give an opportunity for all of our members to be able to engage on all three of these presentations.
So they won't see me, but they can hear me, right?
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. They'll be looking at prettier things. Okay, all right. Thank you to ECSECC for the opportunity. Good afternoon, colleagues. Congratulations to the authors and everyone who commissioned this work. So I'm from the Black Management Forum, the national chair of the young professionals. Look, I think the starting point for me in the way we kind of approach this reading, perhaps, Prof, and the long and short of it is that the book kicks off important public debates, and so rather than get entangled in trying to critique it from an academic point of view, we spent more of the energy on trying to come up with the real life conversations that could emanate from the public sphere and public life. And so I think from the start, I must declare that those images you see are by Andre Oosthuizen, because I think he's the only person who knows how to capture our city well. And I must criticize you though, guys, in the beginning. I was quite offended when I saw a picture of Cape Town in the book. I understand that the book is supposed to be an inclusive book that talks about other parts of the country in terms of the smart city logic. But I think we missed the opportunity of projecting our beautiful city as the focal point there in that. I think there's an image right at the beginning that shows a Cape Town stadium. I think from a bias point of view, I would have loved to. I know it's a petty issue, but I mean, here are beautiful pictures by Andre Oosthuizen that I think belong in a book of this nature. But it's really an excellent work of transformative research. I think that for me is that sticks out. And I think it does point out that the smart city debate is obviously not new, and South Africa is obviously behind in terms of it and what other countries on the continent have tried to do. I curated that towards the creative smart city back in 2019 on the fringes of Umtiza, because I'm also got a vested interest in this kind of debate. It's quite interesting. As you were speaking, I was thinking about data inequality at Devereux Avenue. There's the Debonaires there. So I picked up the other night that they actually offer free Wi-Fi, because I saw a lady who left her apartment just to go and bum Wi-Fi. And I started thinking, wow, what kind of city is that when we start thinking about the fact that people will literally have to go to anywhere to try and access data? So if you think that apartheid inequality is bad, think about data inequality, and because it's invisible, and so the damage it does to people, the lack of access, and obviously it really peaks with the students who we send into these tertiary institutions to become the next. So I think also it comes across clear that the book is about helping us think about East London as the university city or the campus city. And I think that's important in terms of the diversification of the economies. I'm going to really confine a lot of the remarks to Buffalo City for now, and I understand that there's a bigger picture to be discussed around smart cities. But I do believe that there is a sense that the government tends to have these grand narratives and gestures on wanting to come up with new things to latch onto. So the dream of the smart city, but really the call from the book to return to the cause of the city, got me thinking about other forms of evolution in the public life of a city like Buffalo City. A lot of the elite actually started retreating probably in the late 90s. And I think the real tension for me is whether the elite would still want to come and reinvest their money in the inner city of Buffalo City. And I think that's where our tension lies in terms of the investments of government and where you'd like them to be directed versus the interests of the elite, whether black or white, actually. So for that reason alone, the renewal of the cause and the growth of the inner city is probably going to have to be reliant on the students on one hand, but also the young professionals and young entrepreneurs who we find here. And I think it does make a point about seeing this part of the world as innovation platforms. So how do we harness the ideas and the creativity and the innovation that exists amongst our young people, our young startup entrepreneurs? Our contention, though, is that the whole notion of smart, and you will see how I've kind of put in brackets the art, because for me, smart is a combination of science, maths in the South African logic, and art, right? So the current narrative around smart has been tech heavy. And I think that is really where the government runs the risk of trying to respond to capital, because a lot of FDI flows are going into ICT related notions of innovation, right? But exclusionary to the creative class, right? Yeah. And so if you look at your Richard Floridas of this world, and they tell you about San Francisco and the rise of the tech hubs, it's actually creatives, it's graphics designers and all those kinds of people who are brought in to build the Googles of this world. So we have an excellent opportunity here to actually correct that narrative in terms of what innovation is and what smart is, and how the government and other decision makers are thinking about those things. This is a personal notion of the fourth citizen. It's a concept that I'm developing around the idea of what is the anatomy of the citizen of the fourth industrial revolution, and which I then equate to the urban dweller in a smart city kind of thing. And really it's just about sort of this individual or this student at Forte is studying because they have to be a global citizen in a world without borders through technology, right? And in everything that they do, they're informed by a transdisciplinary and programmatic outlook. They embrace uncertainty. That's what COVID has taught us. And sustainability. They're digitally savvy, and they're both creative and innovative. And they are quite sort of aware of complex adaptive systems and what Olivier Desjardins calls delivery configuration. So how do you empower people to know how to think about actual systems of delivery instead of sort of the grid-based central outlook of access to energy? what opportunities that does green energy and energy alternatives offer for actual systems of delivery. And I think the other point that does come out in the book is how do you retain people in the rural development without necessarily trying to take urbanism and modernity and galvanize the rural outback. And it's because our picture of development is modernity, right? So Lwazi Lushaba calls it development is modernity and modernity is development. So how do we appeal to the decision makers to go beyond that entrapment and not to assume that just because you're a rural dweller, what you want to live is a modern life in the sense that we see it. And also, I think a lot of it that strikes me, Prof, is really the way the register of the book is not afraid to confront the political economy. I think sometimes academics tend to shy away from really engaging in. I mean, when you read about sort of a speech that was made by, say, Minister Lindiwe Sisulu and sort of all of those elements coming out in raw form in the narrative of the book, I think are a rich thing, because I think that's what makes it accessible to the public in terms of the discussions that can take place. And I think that it's a powerful tool for galvanizing the public debate and also seeking a compelling vision around which society can begin to revisit all kinds of debates around nationalism and all kinds of things, because our country is kind of lacking a valid vision. So I see the book mainly as something of a workbook that can be a reason why book reading clubs meet in the evenings and start to have debates, a reason why ECSECC can invite the business forums on this world and look at specific chapters, like the notion of the 15-minute city and so on. Yeah. So I think those themes are, if we leave with this room today with an agenda to take those themes out there and say, how do we have public engagements? I think we will actually help South Africans kind of elevate their public discourse, because right now it gets very politically toxic. We get caught up in debates about who's going to be the next president and so on, while the country is not getting anywhere. And so I think within that political economy, all our work is always confronted by this kind of Cabral notion of, the people are not interested in our ideas, but they're interested in our outcomes. So where do you draw the line between the role of knowledge production in academia and where politicians might see themselves and business people? So I think we're always oscillating on that scale at all times. This is my favorite one. This had the privilege of visiting Havana in 2019. Before COVID, and it's really going back to this notion of modernism and modernity, what struck me about walking through the streets of Havana was how the city was a kind of place frozen in time, in a pre-modern state, because you must understand the revolution gets in the way of kind of like the flyovers and the motor vehicle that have kind of informed our picture of most cities. And so here you find a city that you can walk around all day, where the cars have got very limited space and tight alleys to walk around, where the fabric is very humane and it sort of reminds one of this notion of livable urbanism, right? So, but I think again, Prof, when I was thinking through that, I was thinking about this relationship between the periphery and this agenda for the core. Is we haven't done the work of marking out what our optimum densities are for a place like East London. So the sustainable cities argument is that you must first densify to about 4 stories for optimum densities of all kinds of resource flows before you kind of expand beyond the periphery. And South African development has largely been predicated on urban sprawl, right? We all know that, and it's putting limits on. And I wonder if those things are not starting to buckle now under costs of fuel and other kinds of pressures as well. And so, and then I think when we think about this core and peripheral kind of dichotomy, we also have to think about the temporary city, informal city that is emerging in Gopas and the like. Ironically, again, going back to this point, Prof, about your sort of seeing the city as a place of innovation. I'm a master's candidate for architecture, so I'm looking at a thesis around the Beacon Bay Gopas area. What would it mean if you put an innovation hub there? Because you've got an interesting micro industry burgeoning on the edges of that street there, with those guys either fixing a car or something, and you've got the hardware stores on the other side of the street, right? And then you turn over into the Gunubi route, and then you've got Gopas itself, which is essentially kind of a pirate modernity, if that's what Rahul Malhotra calls it, but has access to the same services to a certain extent as everyone living in Beacon Bay, paying their rates and so on and so forth. So it's quite an interesting thing when you think about the informal city in that regard, and this whole notion of returning back to the core. How does this inform housing policy for BCM and other cities that, again, so, and then the notion of centers is also quite interesting for me. You know, when you say we return to the core, does the return to the center necessarily mean we're returning to Oxford Street? Could we think about Amalinda as a new center, for argument's sake? What if Amalinda is one of the most central new centers that have emerged in post-apartheid South Africa? It's linking Tanzania, it's linking, you know, Duncan Village and so on. So again, the notion of the center is not necessarily always a fixed idea. I do kind of envision the university district informing what happens in the inner city near the library there, but as a learning hub. And then maybe when you move towards Quigley, I would imagine something like a creative district. So there's a lot of hybrids that can happen. A creative district that kind of starts to talk to the tourism agenda around even the investments that Transnet wants to make into the hub and so on and so forth. So, and then my favorites is always like the impermanence, right? The temporary uses of public space. Because one of the challenges that we do face as a country is that our leaders like cutting ribbon for bricks and mortar developments. So where do you draw the line in terms of, and of course we'll go to our shared favorite space on the beachfront, the exercise that's currently underway, you know, like, is it better to keep that as a temporary use space, or is it better to do what is being done currently right now? I think time will tell. And then I think when one starts to think about the entrepreneurial ecosystem that the city must create or enable, my favorite are always the mothers who braai at Ebuhlanti. I always think Ebuhlanti is our own version of the African agora. It's really where a lot of vitality takes place, cultural exchanges. It's really an urban sink, right? Like it absorbs so much social pressures for our city. If a guy wants to have a drink, they can pass out in their car safely in Atlantic without getting arrested or anything like that. So everyone can go there and be part of this really melting pot and still be safe and still. So I think Atlantic and its evolution is quite interesting for me. And so what does informal trade look like for the interest of these people, the relationships that are being built between them and their loyal customers who keep coming back to them? And then I guess in the information age, you get a South African who gets to see themselves appearing on the side of a billboard in New York because of online music digital platforms, right? So this kind of notion of a no borders society. What are we doing with our building edges? Are they live or are they dead, right? So again, Andre Oosterhuizen is a hero because all I had to do was go into his Facebook page and find all the right pictures to make the point, and there it was, a precinct that tells a lot. So for me, this area is quite interesting. There's a private school emerging there up to the top. There's a well-to-do gated complex, and then you've got the poor right slap bang next to this mall. Like it's really a microcosm of all the South African And then again, in terms of the learning town, in terms of the pathways to development and economic activity and opportunity, you've got sort of, again, in this whole notion of digital skills and kind of tech-heavy notion of innovation, you've got programs like these that are trying to roll out training. Versus also a lot of high levels of unemployment. So could we start thinking about remote work and the opportunities for teaching English in Asia while you're sitting in Gobas, you know? So I think there's, again, maybe plugging into your precinct of the learning town, you know? I think those are amazing possibilities for our city. And then, yeah, luckily we can now get to the pretty pictures. I mean, I also found it quite interesting, the link in the book that talks about the smart city that's envisioned for sort of the Wild Coast region of Port St. John's and the like. And Al Stratford will tell you that the climate of East London and Port St. John's is probably some of the best in the country. So it was quite interesting how those two areas are linked there. But really, we've got the best weather. We've got an amazing low density city that can still be developed to optimum levels of density before we would technically need to worry about sprawl. But I don't think the elite is necessarily invested in that being their priority. I live in the inner city, and one of the things that was interesting for me under COVID was being 5 to 10 minutes walking distance from Spa Berea, Spa Vincent, Guild Theatre, and so on and so forth. So rather than, maybe the real estate people are going to kill me for this one, but rather than the way people think about access to housing as kind of this sort of Joburg notion of safety and security, maybe we should sort of be driving a discussion around, do we think about places to live in terms of proximity to work, proximity to services, and so on. And we kind of turn this thing on its head, this paranoia about public safety or burglary. And so those for me are safety and security issues that need the law enforcement entities to do their work. Right? They shouldn't necessarily be the reasons why people prefer to go and live in enclaves at the expense of a decaying city. So I think the real challenge that we're facing is that our city is decaying because the prospective buyer, who's a young lawyer, a young attorney who's moving into the city for the first time, is actually being attracted to housing developments in the fringe, right? And we're not doing enough to raise the opportunity on what it would mean to great family city to raise kids in, great schools, proximity to that as well. Yeah, and then, of course, we traded this kind of festive outlook for what's coming up now, like outdoor gym by the beach. It's going to be fun. I think I'm going to wrap up. And I think, again, you know, when we think about temporary ways and as smart ways of making the city, we have an opportunity to tap into tourism's this is Berlin November, right? So again, it's a spectacle that kind of taps into the elastic potential of our city, only temporarily, but still accumulating value for entrepreneurship and so on. And then the aesthetics of place. I mean, this does look like a foot with a sandal, right, from the top there. I think those literacies are necessary for us as people in how we inhabit space to start kind of understanding the importance of aesthetics of place. And I think that we're missing the opportunity if we're going to build physical infrastructure developments on every open space. We're missing the opportunities for the exchanges for innovation, social and otherwise. And I think the other point that I wanted to make was there is an existing framework, right? There is a grant-making culture that's developing in South Africa to boost startups and so on. And you're seeing it in the likes of the Technology Innovation Agency's Grassroots Innovation Program. It's not so much tech-heavy in its outlook, but of course, it creates the opportunities for technology to thrive there. But it's really where you need the rural kid to be able to plug in, because the solutions that they might have might not necessarily start off with the computer as a tool, but might as a solution, but might use it as a tool over a period of time. And then I think my last point would be really the question, Prof, for me would be, Smart city, smart districts, do we need a complete transition, or is the presence of the SEZs and their innovation parks already the catalyst and the window through which we should transition into the kind of smart city logic? And could we drive our vision from a proper and well-coordinated, deliberate agenda to actually use the science and technology parks or innovation parks of our SEZs as the gateway to like the smart city, so that you actually don't necessarily end up with a total kind of Siemens kind of futuristic outlook of the smart city, but actually you've got a very rich hybrid notion of districts moving from Quigney to the university part of town, going up Oxford, going back to Amalinda, and various parts of the city. So I think what I really must take my hat off for the authors for was taking a subject that is national and using this part of the world as the case study for it, because let's face it, I mean, and this is the argument that's been made by others like Mcebisi Jonas, to say the next wave of growth in South Africa is going to be driven by our coastal economies, right? So I think that in this particular context, this coastal economy has a lot of opportunity bubbling under and is just sort of limited by the kind of choices that we make. It's got a lot of young people who are here, who are talented, who are doing amazing things. Semigration and post-COVID retrenchments have also meant that a lot of kind of skill and capacity has returned home. And so how are we tapping into that? These WhatsApp groups that we are forming as community networks of sharing ideas, sharing information. I belong to something called the Eastern Cape Entrepreneurs Under 35 network with about 200 young entrepreneurs. And so you get information on a grant opportunity, you get information on a funding competition and so on. And we're starting to see real life experiments kind of coming. And that's really where the potential of the kind of smart thing and data and access to data, or data as the new oil, should really be channeled to. So I think salute to authors. I think we just need to take this now and make a deliberate agenda for it to inform our meetings and business forums, in community forums, in community policing forums. I mean, there was a break-in at Jules on Jarvis last night. The other day, they cleaned out another restaurant. So how do you counter this crime deliberately so that it doesn't discourage people from wanting to buy property and move into that central part of town and actually live a much more economical life because of proximity to services and probably the prospect of walking to work and so on. And I think I must leave it there. I mean, there's a lot that I could have gone through, but there will never be enough time. And I'm sorry if I might have taken too long, but yeah, okay.
All right, thank you very much for that response. That was Mr. Papa Mamnambi from the Black Management Youth Forum. Thank you very much for that response. Interesting views that are coming out around innovation, around infrastructure, and around inclusive urban development there. Colleagues, if you can just bear with us, we only have one more presentation that will be coming through from the Eastern Cape Youth Business Chambers. Mr. Tangile. Are they not? I believe that he might be connected on the digital platform. So can you just confirm if you're there? Okay, so colleagues, it looks like that is where we will end our presentations. Firstly, we'd like to congratulate and thank all of the speakers. I will then hand over to our attendees on Teams if they would like to engage with any of the presentation, and thereafter I'll give an opportunity to the colleagues that are in the boardroom. So I'll hand over to you, colleagues, for any questions. You may indicate by raising your hand. Okay, you are noted, Zobani. Colleagues, is there any other hand? Okay, you may proceed, Koban.
Oh, thanks, Chair. Gobani Msindwana, Head of Knowledge Management Research and Policy at BCM. Firstly, I would like to appreciate the presentations, and it's just a comment for me. If we could be given the presentations, that would be appreciated. And I think as the presentation there that were done, I think it would also assist us as BCM because we're in a process of constructing a smart city strategy. And the presentations that have been tabled here, I think they would be more useful for us as a city so that we can expand on the ideas that would be created through the strategy. I just wanted to highlight that Chair. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that, sir. We have a second hand from Mr. Lipongo Nhlokonkulu. You can go ahead, but
thank you, Chair. A word of appreciation to the presenters. This was quite very informative and enlightening up. I'll also just make a comment because we discussed and Upapama just covered almost a greater part of my areas of concern. You know, when one talks of the smart city, there's a deliberate or a common neglect of the township. Like as I said, Papama made mention of the fact that made reference to the rural development or rural economy. Professor, ironically, you know, the establishment or the development of the malls in the townships has kind of accidentally brought in the technology, because it is through these malls and kind of office blocks developed in the township that we indirectly get access to optic fiber and the like. So that's been my concern. And also you made mention of the fact that issues of infrastructure play a bigger role. I mean, the townships have been deliberately neglected all around the visual infrastructure. For instance, in areas around Gqeberha, in the townships around Gqeberha, there's an influx of students to the townships because of overcrowding found in the reses of NNMU and their associated or the link up campuses. So, and more so with the medical school being in one of the NNMU kind of a branch or campus, there are quite a number of students now trying to find accommodation in the proximity of their campuses. So I'll stop here and again say my word of gratitude. This was quite an insightful and yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nhlokonkulu. Are there any other questions coming through from the digital platform? Okay. Are there any questions coming through from the boardroom? Comments? All right, over to you, Ian.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Maybe there's an indirect question linked to this one, but just some broad comments. I think, you know, the notion of a smart city, I think there's lots of understandings and misunderstandings of what exactly that means. Again, we have sort of like a, as Prof has mentioned, we've got this borrowed narratives and way of thinking it from the West or from the North, and we just use it and we copy it. And wrongfully we copy it, and then we are surprised by the results that come in terms of the sort of the negative social impacts of alienation, crime, and all the other bits, disenfranchisement, the fact that people then have high levels of poverty, you are buying into a more sort of consumptive, unproductive economy. You're not really leveraging off the creative talent of the local communities. You're just locking them into something, some model that is taking them away from their own development. So again, I think my question or my issue is around how do we have more debates and discussions and put more options on the table that allow for sort of a richer understanding, and then a sort of a model to be developed, or models to be developed, that is less colonial, more African, embraces more sort of the urban, rural issues that we have in Southern Africa, that allows us to have flourishing human development, if that's at all possible, that allows us to find a balance between digitizing and making sure that people are creative, that we utilize people more. We don't have sort of like robots doing everything, and us, like the one movie, what's it, not Chappie, the other one, the Stephen, the movie, what's it called? It's in 1970s or 80s. Steven Spielberg. Steven Spielberg's movie, where you have this utopian future where people get fat. It's a brilliant cartoon, and it's sort of real life issue as well. Is that people get fat, machines are doing everything, and it's almost like a red pill, blue pill thing. When you wake up, you see, hey, no, this world is not what I signed up for. But you only need to be woken up before you realize that no, this thing is really not conducive. So how do we engender more of this sort of positive African, decolonized? I don't want to use the smart city because again, I think it's a borrowed or used concept that is just giving me all sorts of wrong ideas. But it's sort of like an appropriate city where we're developing people. We are not marginalizing them. They have access to appropriate, relevant levels of technology. They are always being creative. There's a balance between computers or AI, and it's all being used to serve humanity, not to disserve. And we're not having a sort of an unfair accumulation of wealth to a few, and then the others are all just living on BIG and sitting there like Steven Spielberg's model, the movie, just getting fat and just living off the BIG, and then somebody needs to wake them up before they realize that they're heading for nowhere. I think that's the important thing for me. I think how do we, then the second issue is that how do we make sure that whatever we do in the Eastern Cape is then reinforcing those type of things? Because I think we're heading in the wrong direction. We are just borrowing a concept. We're now going to have a Western looking city in Port St. John's, BCM, Amatola with its smart city sort of thingy. How do we change that? And how do we get like real debate and engagement about all the options before we say yes? So I like what the book says about sort of invoking Mazakatu. I think she's on it in terms of getting the state to lead. Whether we have got the capability and the capacity to lead is a different thing. But I think we need to find a neutral leader who's going to set the direction, and then whoever wants to play in that direction can do it, and not the other way around where somebody with a vested interest in the private sector is leading, and then because you're buying into that, you must now buy all of the products and the services that they offer and that only they can offer, and then you can move forward. So I mean, let's leave it there.
I think there's just one point that now comes to mind now that you've mentioned it. One of the things, Prof, in the book for me that I also think is worth expanding on is I don't necessarily think we come from a position where we're totally against the idea of creating a totally equitable city typology in post-apartheid South Africa. I don't think that's wrong at all. I think that when one looks at the president saying, I want to build a smart city, one moment it's in Lanseria, one moment it's in Port St. John's. Those are two types of images of smart city, and perhaps one is driven by maybe there's some FDI that is ready to flow from China. Maybe they've run out of space to build their vacant cities. There was talk of cities that are uninhabited, you know, so they're looking for a new frontier to land their capital. There's nothing necessarily wrong with capturing FDI that is going to be purposefully looked at for that. And another debate worth having linked to that is the location around Wild Coast, Ekolobeni, all those complexities, is it really informed by an assessment of the potential of developing an urban node there, or is it a political ploy? And I think that's where the real tension lies, is that once the leader or the politician or whoever makes the pronouncement, the civic society must pile in, the professionals must pile in, the entrepreneurs must pile in, and be able to articulate what this thing means, so that by the time it goes to development, it's an outcome of a consensus that everyone has played a part in. Right now, we're very polarized on whether we want mining to happen in Kolobeni, because obviously there's climate change, but there's also the reality that commodities are still a thing, right? So the question is, should you forego that? And what if you're sitting there with serious deposits that could give you one of the post-apartheid, because the cities also that we want to refit in the core are also cities that were built to disenfranchise people. So they were built so that certain people would spend 50% of their income traveling to work. And so so in that thing, we must also be open to say, couldn't we maybe just get away with one city in perhaps the Eastern Cape? And especially when one thinks about the notions of the Wild Coast SEZ. I'm latching back to this thing of these SEZs, because I think that there's already so much investment, and you've already won a lot of the political economy battles in terms of the vote for that kind of strategic thrust for investment. So sometimes we come up with grand ideas.
What city is a SEZ? I mean, is that a city?
It's not a city, but it's a catalyst to some kind of form of making of place that can result in the city. I'm not saying the SEZ.
It's like a smart from the start thing. My argument in the book is embedded smartness is the preferential. So while I don't agree with everything that Harrison and Jones are saying, so I'm looking at models of embeddedness, how we can embed, and then and I think that the district, this focus on the district model is the main thing that's brought these rural locations into the thing. So, and also offers of capital saying we can, give us the land, give us a leasehold, a 199-year leasehold, and we can do that. I think the experience in Africa is that 99 times out of 100 doesn't actually happen. And that in the meantime, our secondary cities, of which Buffalo City is one of them, are really struggling. I mean, Cape Town is the reason why that image of Cape Town is in the front. That's where Amazon is. Hey, so that that's now being disputed. That whole riverside development area, indigenous peoples' rights, exactly these things. This is our city. Now this big American corporation is going to capture our city, our rights, and our heritage all in one go, without. So those. We don't yet have Amazon fighting for that. So that would be, so how do you embed? Then you run into a second problem that we've been having in this discussion is, of course, we have legacies. Yeah. So one of our speakers saying, once the mall comes in the township, new things happen. For sure. I mean, the idea of developing the opportunities of the core is not at the expense of the Beacon Bay Junction or the Ndansani hub, etc. But the point of the book is that some of the catalysts that drive these things are the EDs and the MEDs. Okay, they are often regarded as the anchor institutions, and they generally, unlike a firm, can't just pack up their bags in downtown East London and go to a business park somewhere. A university is a legacy that is place-based. And so what happens is that these institutions, as they become mired in place, they start to collaborate with one another and reach agreements. Okay, so maybe if Walter Sisulu and Forte and UNISA and Boston College sat around a table and said, how are we going to address student housing? We've got a shortage of it. We're now finding that all those kids that are living outside the thing are suffering on the internet side. How can we let's go to government with a collaborative suggestion for a precinct that will get somebody else to manage, one of your young entrepreneurs to do it, because universities are notoriously bad at managing their own thing. The other thing that they might decide, like what happened during the COVID pandemic, was that the Department of Health couldn't pay the service provider that was keeping the IT running in the hospitals. So you are going with a chronic condition and you've got COVID, and the person is hitting on the computer to find out what's wrong with Vuakazi, and they can't find anything because they've shut that down because of the non-payment of services. And then you think you've got that happening at the same time as students can't get online, at the same time as somebody has to drive all the way to Vincent outside Debonair's to find out where they can download their assignment. And you think that infrastructure, free spaces around those campuses where people can download their reading, a connected, hardwired 5G that could get St. Dominic's, Frere Hospital, the East London Hospital, Forte campus thing, with an IT manager that is managing all of that stuff together. Then, instead of everyone applying to the minister to Blade for this or to the minister that, then all of a sudden 4 or 6 weak institutions becomes one strong proposition. And that's why the danger, of course, is that, yes, there are all sorts of great ideas for the tough, but this idea is to try and focus your attention on this space and to say to you, if you do the right things there, you will lead South Africa, because no other precinct in the country has as many higher education and health facilities within a compressed area. And that, you'll think,
someone needs to mute.
Yeah, the thing that the very important point that you made, really crucial among many others, greatly insightful points, is this idea that you don't have to have tech heavy.
Yeah.
You can be socially smart. Yeah. You can at relatively low levels of investment and business think. You can transform the feel, because this is a critical thing, is that people feel township life because they have been confined to townships and they love townships. I mean, Jacob Lamy wrote a great book called Native Nostalgia about growing up in the townships of Johannesburg, hey? And so while they were a prison, they were his prison sort of thing. I think we've got to think that this city requires the inner city to be much more functional. It doesn't have to be the only thing cutting in the city. It has to be with all that investment on the waterfront, it has to be a hub. People have to gravitate. It has to feel African. That's all the Afrofuturism stuff I had right at the front there. Think about it, imagine it, have public art, make it socially smart. The students have to buzz. But the key to that is that, the sum is, of course, much bigger than the individual parts. And the individual parts are all part of the weaker part of the higher education pyramid, the medical pyramid, the public health pyramid. They're all at the bottom, okay, all of them. And about to be kicked out, it seems, with the new rules. But if they were to join forces in this city in particular, because it's a multi-university, multi-ed med thing, there is really something to be benefited from that conversation. If 5 decent proposals, one for infrastructure, one for smartness, one for, if you could get those campus security guards without beating up black people, that happens in some American cities, you get them out of the institutions and on the streets walking with thing. You can actually up the safety, and with a little bit of cameras and this and that, it can become those public spaces that you imagine can actually really be there. And eBoKlanti isn't there by mistake. It isn't in the heart of that thing by mistake. I mean, you told us it is. That's what people come from Joburg for. So they both love and hate the inner city at the same time. So that's why I'm kind of advocating thinking about this precinct as a start, you know, and then Buffalo City, I know, wants a citywide, you know, inclusive everything. And if the chamber and the vice-chancellors and the heads of those hospitals and you kind of got together and said, let's try and do something. It's not the whole story, but if we do something here in 3 to 5 years' time, the student that comes out with a graduate school of whatever on the thing will be a much better student, will be much more imaginative, will be much better serviced than, you know, the current students who's living in a slum, you know, kind of landlord who'd never invest in the thing, and, you know, because are just sucking on what you know, what there is in this. So I think that, I mean, it was brilliant. I really loved all the engagements, but I still want to get, you know, what is practical? Where can we, you know, as Ian said, the smart city is so many things to so many people. Where can we find a kind of pencil, the pin of the pen of the thing? That's it.
I think that's where now you would probably look at the role of university in providing some of these solutions.
Yeah.
Because if we want to define the smartness for BCM, we really need to know what smartness means to its own people, to its own economy, so that we don't create a smart from the start and then run a consequence of having, you know, cultural shocks. You know, putting people into the deep end and then finding that some of these solutions are not really speaking to some of our problems.
We need to get the doctors around the table and the heads of those institutions. And, you know, they've got
But again, that you need that person that's going to bring everyone to the table. And at the moment now, if you follow Mazakato's thing, she's saying, let it be the state. And let it be the state that's or so wherever that state is, no? But let it be a person with competency and with the neutrality that is able to give direction so that people can then go in the right way.
That there's a social contract. You know, that's a key thing. If you leave business to run the stuff, they run it in a perverse, profit-oriented way. If you leave the state to be all in charge, then you have no growth. You have what I call in the book, occupy urbanism. They all fight over who occupies what, okay? But you need to have both that combination, and that really requires, and your citizens have to feel they belong to this.
Yeah,
to this
be part
deal.
of the process.
And if you get that chemistry right, it's not easy because business can be very persuasive. Yeah, then you really will, it will go very quickly.
Yeah. Sorry, colleagues, on the digital platform, not to leave you behind.
Just this point about institutions that just was triggered here, and I think it's a silver lining for all of us.
Yeah.
Ironically, institutionally right now, at a national system of governance, if you use the Mazzucato entrepreneurial state logic, it is actually the Department of Higher Education, Science and Innovation that's driving a lot of the investment into innovation.
Yeah.
Right. So through the Technology Innovation Agency and their grassroots program and various other programs. So already you've got a strategic entry point to say, what is a conversation around future of higher education in South Africa look like? And also in an age where innovation is actually one of the key things to drive investments and so on and so forth. So it's no longer.
You don't have the local. That's why the chapter on Indian smart cities in that book is interesting, because in India they have the smart city mission. So we know that this is the golden opportunity. Higher education innovation have merged into one department. So this story is their business. It's actually their business, okay? But it's a national umbrella. So what India did is they said, okay, we're going to invest in 100 smart cities, but if you come to us for that money, you must be sure that the Premier is paying his bit. You must be sure that Buffalo City is making the land and the infrastructure there. There will be no money from central government unless those pledges are made. And so what happens there is that the training, the digital training, is the provincial government or the state level functioning. They're going to make sure there's sufficient trained up people for that thing. And then obviously the land and infrastructure issues are the local government thing. And then the national government is giving that, you have to prove that they do fund some things that are just for money, okay? But you have to prove that it's a public good.
Sorry, colleagues, without Just cutting you off there. I'd just like to give special attention to our colleagues in the digital platform. We have Dr. Magibi's hand is up. You can come in, Doc.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks for the presentation, colleagues. Just one comment from my side is that I just browsed through the book now, and there's one point that I think is missing from my side, where there's first an initiation of what is called open data for the municipality. Because to me, if you want to go smart, you must have an open data where data is shared amongst the citizens, amongst government, amongst municipalities, so that everything you get is being through that data, so that you can manipulate the data and play around it and understand the predictive what's happening on the analytics. So to me, I'm missing that part when I'm browsing the book, where there's a suggestion of an open data for the city. Thanks, viewers.
Thank you for that, Doc. Okay, so colleagues, I'd like to give.
And then?
You are muted.
You guys, can you hear us? Vuyo?
Vuyo might be disconnected.
Colleagues, can you hear us from outside?
Yeah, I don't think they can hear us. Let me try to WhatsApp Vuyo.
We can hear now.
Yeah, I can hear from the digital platform.
Can't.
Something happened. Tina siyavana thina digital abeva bona bayizani.
Or we might be disconnected from them.
Yeah. Oh, apologies for that, colleagues. It seems like I got disconnected from my side. I'm not sure if you heard the last remarks from Professor Bank. Can anyone indicate if they have?
No, we didn't.
No, you didn't. Okay, I'd like to pass on back to Prof so that he can give his final remarks. Apologies for that.
Yeah, I wanted to make a very important point about the last question was about open access and open data. And a lot of the debate about smart cities falls into these two camps. On the one hand, they're the progressives who say that we must just have networks, hidden invisible networks all over the show that are democratically available. That will produce a new politics and a new kind of city. Then on the other hand, you have those who say, no, we have to have these separate precincts with smart housing, smart buildings that look fantastic and can project Africa, new Africa. So my argument is really that the one is always kind of presented in exclusion of the other. You're either progressive, and then sometimes I stand up and I go for placemaking. People say, you're so reactionary, you're for capital, you're neoliberal, whatever. But actually the argument of our book is that Africa needs new places, and it can make those places in its cities that it has, and it can make more cities, okay? So it's not one to the exclusion of the other. So I am very much think that the open data thing is underplayed in our book, and much more can be said about that. Think about things like living labs. We have them out there in 10 times. We like to use the idea of living labs in our rural spaces, but there are things that can be used very productively in our urban spaces. So that was my point. And I'd like to just thank you all for really a very engaged session and some very high quality comments and questions from the audience. I hand over.
Okay, thank you, Prof. I think for me, to just end off, I was struck when we spoke about access to data. The Cuban model for me is quite interesting in how they use data to activate public space. So you're not allowed to really use your mobile phone to connect digitally to any platform. You actually have to leave your apartment and go out into the park and sit there and have your WhatsApp chat or something like that. Obviously, you want to be more democratic than that. But I mean, in a country where we still need to make data open source and so on, how do we land up with a scenario where we don't have parks that are littered and unkept in our neighborhoods? Could this be a way of ensuring that they are kind of well secure, connected, and always have visibility? And the other point is there are already instruments that exist for these kinds of things to happen, where the cities should be applying for the necessary grants. I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with the Treasury's City Support Program, right? So I saw it do work in New Brighton, but I'm then asking, why can't it do work in Quigney? You know, so I mean, in Quigney, I'm thinking about the death of Nostrum Tedeni, right? So how do we tackle that from an urban development point of view? How do we enhance a creative district so that that is a safer place to walk, so that there's public visibility of, you know, pedestrian police officers who are ensuring that their visibility tells the public that it's safe to be here, and therefore the criminals are discouraged from whatever. So those are the kind of the soft social interventions that can come from the policy space. But my key take home from today really is that this idea around the university town is our entry point into the discussion, right? Because we can begin from any other vantage point, but this is the advantage that we have, right? So these universities that are in proximity to itself, this urban system is really more connected and more livable than many other parts of the country. This is why people want to come to in East London in December. It's because it's a really nice and livable kind of urbanism. And again, all these districts that we are talking about, whether it's the university district, are not far from each other. If you think about the drive to the IDZ, if you think about the science and technology park. So all these things are on the same corridor that links to the same airport. So spatially, the equitability is there for the taking. And then lastly, from an institutional point of view, I think that ECSECC and the forums and so on should join forces to kind of drive this entrepreneurial state agenda to the powers that be, and probably
link it to the mandate of the Department of Higher Science and Technology, because on the flip side, we are the ones with the high levels of unemployment anyway in this province, right? And you've got the National Skills Fund on the other side looking for ways to create jobs, and you've got the innovation funding that's coming in. So really, like, these university innovation outlooks could be the start of something smart. But again, for me, don't leave the arts out of it. Don't leave creativity out of the notions of innovation. We have many creatives in the city. They're doing amazing experiments already, and the rest you need to do is just complement what they're doing and then give them the necessary transition skills into the digital kind of. Yeah, thanks. Thanks, ECSECC.
Okay, thanks everyone. This was very informative. I just want to have a comment on this open data access for everyone, which is I just wish there was someone from, I don't know if on people that are attending here, we have someone maybe from the Department of Higher Education and Training. This open data access, it's something that I've also realized when I was doing this survey at the Buffalo City, that there is competition than collaboration. So I wish this can be, from now, be established in a way. For instance, even this conversation be somewhere for even the person that is not here to access. So I found out that WUSU is doing their thing, the Forte is doing their thing, Buffalo City TVET is doing their thing. So I can imagine how things could be if there would be a platform where there is where there are these kinds of informative sessions being there for everyone to access, and trying to establish that open access and collaboration for universities, to be specific, and so that that competition aspect be reduced in these higher education institutions, not Forte doing their thing, WUSU doing their thing, the TVETs doing their thing. And if there are opportunities from the government, the opportunities from the business sector, from whoever, so those are communicated to that open access for everyone, not being communicated to WUSU specifically or Forte specifically. So yeah, that's all for me.
Thank you very much for that, Aneza. So I think in essence, some of the issues that have been tabled in this book launch is around, you know, the collaborative effort that could come in from most of these anchor institutions that we find in BCM. And I think just to sum that up, we would gladly say, or maybe even propose that making collaboration the new competition, you know, to drive this urban development and defining this smart city for us as citizens that live in this town. So colleagues, that would be the closing remarks coming through from our book launch. The book has now been publicly launched. It is available. And like I had said earlier on, that the launch of the book has been designed to come through in 3 parts. This has been the first part of the public dialogues under Digital Divide. The next upcoming book launch is going to be hosted at Walter Sisulu University in OR Tambo, which is going to under the thematic area of making collaboration the new competition, evidence-based strategic planning, the role of universities in providing support research to local government. And then the final book launch of the series is going to be hosted by Nelson Mandela University through the Raymond Mhlaba Center of Leadership. And their proposed theme is on leadership, governance, and placing in the knowledge economy. So thank you very much, colleagues, for that. This is the end of our session. And once again, congratulations to all the writers of this wonderful book. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you and goodbye.